Hi, in this JetEngine tutorial, I'm going to show you how to set up custom content types for your website. Before we begin with the tutorial, I highly recommend you check out this document on the Help Center. This is going to go over more details, the difference between a custom post type, and what we're going to be covering in this tutorial is what they call a custom content type. So there's a little more information in here, but what I highly recommend is go down here, about halfway down the article, you're going to see this chart. I love checking out this chart. So this is going to be when you should use a custom post type and when you should be using a custom content type. So you could just follow the diagram right here, but in most cases, you're only going to be using a custom content type when you have a lot of articles, and you could just kind of follow the diagram right here. And in this article, if you scroll down into this section right here where it says performance drawbacks for the CPT, I'm going to show you. So in this example, what we're going to be doing is I'm going to show you how to create a CCT, and I added 3 different posts right here for our podcast. So normally when you're using like a custom post type or anything like that, you can see right here, the content is stored in 2 different databases called WP Post and WP Post Meta. So the issue with that is every time somebody needs to filter something, that information has to be fed from 2 different databases. So that's why there's like a performance hit. But when you use a CCT, what it does is it combines all of that data into one table. So here's an example of that CCT podcast table right here. So when I select data, you're going to see that it just has those 3 posts inside of there. And here's all the information that I was able to add as the CCT. So long story short is you're going to want to use CCT if you have a whole bunch of posts, because it's going to make it a lot easier when you need to search or filter or anything like that. You're going to see a much better performance. So now we can go ahead and get started with the tutorial. And later in the segment, I'm going to show you how if you click on one of these listings, you can have it pop up right here and show dynamic information. So I can have it where each one of these has its own specific links, all tied to the CCT. So if I click on that one, you can see it's going to pull up that, and then they can listen to this specific podcast. So now we can get started to build everything out on the back end. The first thing we need to do is go ahead and enable the custom content types. So just head over into JetEngine, just click right here, and then click this button where it says custom content types and hit save. So by default, this is not going to be on. So now when you enable that, you're going to see this new option right down here called custom content types. And as you can see, when I click on that, I already have this one that I created called podcast. So throughout this tutorial, I figured it might be a little bit easier to just kind of reverse engineer how I build everything so you could see how it should look before you get started. So now let me jump over into podcast. So this is what it looks like when I have the 3 podcasts. And if I click on one of these, you're going to see that this is going to look different than what you're probably normally used to, like a custom post type or like a regular WordPress post. This is what a CCT is going to look like. So this is where you're going to go ahead and all of this information inside of here is all like metadata. So there's nothing that's like default WordPress, if that makes sense. So that makes it a lot easier to target these meta fields by using JetEngine. So as you can see right here, I have the title, I have a thumbnail. So that's what's showing right here. I have the product description. So this is a listing, and you can see right here the product description. And then down here, I just have the podcast number. I'm not really referencing that anywhere, but I just have it in here. And then I have a unique Spotify link and Apple Podcast link. So those 2 links I just showed you, Spotify and Apple Podcasts, I wanted to show you how you can target that inside of like a pop-up. So if you don't need a pop-up, you don't have to worry about having that type of functionality. You can just easily add it inside of your like listing grid right here. Now that you see how this is all built out, let me go into JetEngine and the custom content type I created, and then I'm going to show you all the settings I enabled in order to make this, all work correctly. So what you're going to want to do first is just go ahead and click add new, and then give it a unique name. So in this case, I'm just calling it podcast. And you can see right here on the left side, that's what it's going to look like right here. So you can position this anywhere on this list, and then you can give it a unique icon. And then right down here, I'm just going to give it the same slug. And then that table I showed you in the beginning of this tutorial, this is what you can go ahead and call it. So I'm just going to call it like CCT_podcast. And then we're going to be covering this section right here later. This is called has single page, because each one of these CCTs isn't tied to like a page or anything. It's just that data I showed you in the database. It's just that. And then you're using a listing grid to kind of display that information. Whereas this has single page will actually create a unique page for each one of your CCTs. So like I said, I'll cover that later in the tutorial. This is where you're going to go ahead and give it the custom icons. I just gave it like a microphone. And then this is where you can go ahead and change where you want it to be displayed on the left side. So I just chose like first separator. You can put it above the dashboard if you want it, anywhere you want. So that's what's really cool about that. And then I just kept this option right here by default. I didn't turn on any of these right here. And then what I did is I went ahead and chose this right here where it says hide field names. I just enabled that. So that's going to hide the field names like on the back end. So when you're on one of these post types right here, it's not going to display all the field names, you know, when you click on each one of these. Let me go into one. It would normally have like the meta fields right below it. So that's optional. I've just enabled that off, so it's a little bit cleaner. So now when you go underneath fields, you're going to want to go ahead and click new field. Now let me show you, like I said, I have a title, thumbnail, description, podcast number, and then the 2 links for Spotify and Apple. So this is what it's going to look like within the editor on the back end. So you could just go ahead and I'm going to open up a few of these. So you could see I gave this very first one just podcast title. That's the ID right here, or the slug is just podcast_title. And then I'm making this where it's just a regular field and then text. So this is pretty standard like custom post type of stuff. So it's no different than if you did like a regular custom post type. It's basically the same thing. And then underneath here, I like to enable this one where it's quick edit. So they can go ahead and make a quick edit to the page rather than have to go into it. So that's how I did the title. The thumbnail, I just went ahead and gave it a name. And then underneath field type, I chose media. So that's just going to give the user the ability to upload, you know, a file to the regular WordPress media library and then reference it back. And then the description is just using a text area. So you can see that this is just like a normal text area right here. And then the podcast number, like I said, I'm not really referencing it, but I wanted to put that in here. That is called a number field. So you can go ahead and later, if I wanted to sort by, you know, the podcast numbers or anything like that, I could easily do that. And then for the Spotify and Apple podcast link, I'm just using regular text, just like the title up there, just having it where you just type in regular text. And then later you can reference that as like a regular like link. And that's it. So once you have all of those fields, what's really nice is now underneath admin columns, it's going to automatically show all of the different ones right here. And all you need to do is just click if you want it to show in the admin columns. So what that means is when you go to your CCT, these are the admin columns. So I have it where it's just storing the ID, the title, and that's really about it. But if I go underneath and I wanted to, let's say, have the thumbnail, I can enable that. And then you could choose if you want it to be sortable or not. But let me go ahead and just show you that when you enable like thumbnail, now you're going to see the thumbnail within here. So we have podcast thumbnail. So it makes it a lot easier and visual if you need that. So you can have description, the different podcast links, all of that. And then you could also have like created date, modified date, status, you know, there's a lot. Let me actually just go ahead and turn on a few of these and just show you. If I turn on the created date and the status, it might look a little bit kind of like what it looks like as a regular like post. Now you can see when it was created and the status right here. And then that quick edit button, when you click that, now I have it where you could easily change title, description, the links or anything like that. You could just go ahead and change that and it'll automatically update. So you don't have to go into each one and click edit. The next part of the tutorial is now we need to create the listing item, like this card right here, and then we're going to do the listing grid so it gets displayed on a page. So now what we need to do is just go and click where it says listings. And you can see I have this one right here called podcast listing template. So what you're going to want to do is click add new listing. And up here where it says listing source, make sure you hit custom content type. And then the one that we just created called podcast, that's what you need to select right here. And just give it a name. Like I said, I have podcast listing template. And then just hit create. In this case, we're going to be using Elementor. We're not going to be using Blocks or Gutenberg. But let's go ahead and do that. And I'm going to show you how it looks on the page on the back end. So once that loads up, it's going to look very similar to this, where you're just going to have like an empty container. If you don't see an empty container, just click the plus button and then just select one of these. So this is what we're going to be covering in this part of the tutorials. Let's just go ahead and make it where we can pull in the image, the title, the bio, like the description. And instead of a listen now, because that's going to do the pop-up, now I'll just show you how you can add, like, let's say the Spotify and the Apple Podcast link, and then how that all works. The first thing I like to do is go ahead and kind of shrink it down to this size. So what I mean by that is about the width of this. So if you know you want to have like 3 containers, it's much easier if you click on the settings right down here on the bottom left, that little cog icon, go to listing settings, and then go ahead and just give it a width right here. Just something that's pretty close to what you're going to, be displaying on like a desktop. Then what we need to do is just start to click and drag in widgets. So there's a couple different ways that you can go ahead and build out something like this. You can use like regular Elementor widgets and then pull that in and then just use like the CCT data. Or if you're using, in this case, we're going to be, creating all of this stuff using the listing. If you look underneath, there's in Crocoblock, they have a listing elements section right here, and you can pull in all of this dynamic information. So you can kind of go either way. I figure if you're going to be using CCTs and Crocoblock, it might be best to just stick with these. And so let's go ahead and click and drag in the first one called dynamic image. Then what you're going to want to do is just click on that. And you're going to see there's a whole section right here just called content type podcast. And all you need to do is just click on the thumbnail. And when you do that, it's going to automatically pop up and show you the number 3 episode right here. Then you just kind of style it up like you would any other, widget inside of Elementor. You can choose the image resolution. We're going to be covering the linking later, so I'll show you how to link that later. But let's just get all the information in there first. And the next one is, let's say, the title. And to create that, you just go ahead and let's click in the dynamic field right here. And this is just kind of pulling in regular like information like text. So in this case, we want to have it where it's just going to pull in the title. So just keep the source at the very first one, post. And then underneath the object field, just scroll toward the bottom and you're going to see all of your different meta fields that we created earlier. So we have a podcast title. So you just want to go ahead and click that. Just takes a second to load, and then you're going to be able to change how you want the HTML tag. So if you want to have like an H2, you could do something like that. And then everything else just kind of like regular ways to style up. And in this case, you can see there's like a bit of a extra gaps at the top. So that's probably the line height. So you can go ahead and just change out the line height if you have these gaps. So you can just go ahead, style this up like you normally would any other widget. Now let's pull in basically the same thing, but we're going to be doing, let's do the same thing. We're going to just pull in the dynamic field underneath that one. And this is going to be the description. So like I said, keep the first one at post. Let's scroll down and then you're going to see podcast description. And then you probably want to keep that as like a regular P tag. So whatever you have throughout your theme, that's going to take over, that. And then if you start to see that there's all these gaps in between your containers, that's probably, if you click on the regular container, you might want to change out the regular gaps right here. So you could do 0. So there's like no gaps. And so you could style it up however you want. So now I'm going to have no gaps in between my widgets. And then I'm going to rely on line heights and padding on the widget level. A lot of different ways you can style this thing up. And like I said, so let's do, instead of the listen now, let's go ahead and pull in a new container. So what I recommend is click on the very last one. So in this case, that description we just created, just go back over into here underneath layout and just click container. So now we're going to put the 2 images inside of this container. And in this case, we don't need a dynamic image. We just need like a regular static image. And then we can link it to that CCT link. So just click and drag in a regular Elementor image widget. And then you're going to upload your file. In this case, I already have Spotify. And then let's go ahead underneath advanced. And right here where it says width underneath layout, let's give it a width of 50%. So now we're going to have that image on the left. And then what I like to do is just duplicate. And we're going to have the Apple Podcast right here. And in order to have it next to each other, what we need to do is go into the container we just created and click this button right here where it says horizontal. That's going to automatically put it right next to it. So just go ahead and select the one that we just duplicated, add the Apple Podcast. And so now we have these 2 in there just like that. And now let's go ahead and add a little bit of padding all the way around and like a color background. So it's really easy to do. All you need to do is just make sure you select the main container that it's all sitting in. And underneath padding, let's give it like 20. So something like 20 should be good. And then underneath style, we have the different background colors. So you can just click classic. And then I have this color right here. So now it's got some extra padding, so it stands out from each other. So you don't want just like a regular white background. Now what we can do is decide what buttons are going to get linked. So in this case, let's just go ahead and make it where the Spotify link and the Apple Podcast are linked correctly. And to do that, you just select the image, go underneath content, and where it says link, go ahead and just click custom URL. And then this button right here where it says dynamic tags. Now we need to scroll all the way to the bottom, and underneath JetEngine, there's this tab right here called custom content type field. Just go ahead and click that. And then underneath field, now we can select all of the different fields that we created inside of that CCT. And in this case, we want to have the one called Spotify link. So that's why it's really important to make sure you label everything correctly in your meta fields, because when you reference them later, it's going to make it a lot easier. You don't want to have it where it's like text number 1, text number 2. It's going to be too confusing. And then same thing, you just need to go underneath the link for the Apple Podcast. And then we're going to be going to the same area and just choose Apple Podcast this time. So Apple Podcast link. And so now these two buttons should now link directly to that URL. Just go ahead and hit update or published. And let's go ahead and actually add that to the page. And so now I'm on a brand new page inside of Elementor, and it just brought in a title widget right here that's just static, just says like WP Creators Podcast. Now what we need to do is pull in what they call the listing grid. So it's going to pull in what we just created and display it like in a grid. So just search for the words listing grid and just pull that widget in right here. Then underneath listing, we need to just do a search for the one we created. So that was called podcast listing template. That was the thing we just created. So when you do that, it should pull in everything automatically. And then underneath here where it says columns number, this is of course where you can change how many columns you want. So you can do 1 column, 3 columns. In this situation, I'm just going to keep it very simple, just the 3 columns. And then you can change how many different posts you want to display. So if you have a whole bunch of them, you can display that all right here. And now let's go ahead and hit update on this page and make sure that these links are working correctly. And here we are on the front end of that page. And when I hover over each one of these, I can see that they're all different URLs, which is a good thing. But let's go ahead and click on one of them. In this case, that was episode 3. So you can see that was episode 3 comes up. And then we have the Spotify link for number 2. So number 2 works. Let's make sure that the Apple Podcast works. That looks like it's working correctly. So these links are working correctly, and you probably notice they open in the same window. If you do need that to open in a new window, you can always go back into your listing template we created. Click on the cog right here where it says link options, and you can do open a new window. So depending on your use case, you might want to open that up in a new window, hit update. And now when we go back into this page, you're going to see that it opens up in a new window. And then one cool little bonus tip is you might notice that this description isn't as long as these other ones, so they're not all equal height. So let me show you a cool little way to fix that. So if you go back into the listing grid that we just created, they have this button right here where it says equal column heights. Just go ahead and click that on and hit update. So now when you do that, you can see if I hit refresh, it's going to automatically update whatever the shortest one is and push it down the screen. Now, if you want to have a situation where you want all of these buttons to line up, there's one other thing you can do, and that is go back into your listing template we created, click on the description. In this case, we want to have it where like it pushes those icons down if it's too short. Just go ahead underneath, in that situation is the dynamic field for the description. Go underneath advanced, and under layout, there's see this button right here where it says grow underneath size. What that's going to do is automatically grow it and push those icons down. It will make sense once I go back here and hit refresh. So now if I hit refresh, it's going to push those things down. So it's going to grow that container, whatever space is left, and push all that down. So in most cases, you're going to want to make sure it looks very uniform like that for good, user experience. So that's how you can go ahead and create a CCT and display all of your dynamic information inside of like a listing grid. Now, if you have a situation where you want to display some information, like let's say just the thumbnail and the title, and then you want to have it where the user has to click a button and then go to like a page with more information specifically on that, that's where you're going to have to go ahead and click this button where it says has single page. Basically, what that's going to do is whenever you create a new CCT listing, it's going to also create a normal like WordPress post. And then from there, you can have it where the user can click on it and then it goes to like a regular post. Because right now there's no post whenever you create one of these CCTs. It doesn't create a post as well. That's kind of like a native WordPress type of functionality. But let's go ahead and enable that and show you how this all works. So you would just go back into your regular CCT types right here, click on has single page. Then underneath right here, this is where you're going to go ahead and probably choose post. So you could choose post, pages, any of these other like custom post types within your website, but let's just go ahead and choose post. So like I said, when you create a new CCT, it's going to also create as a regular like blog post. Then underneath title field, what you can do is just select the meta field that we have right here called title, and the content field is description. So that's going to add a regular title and the content would be the description. It will all make sense once I get it all set up. So you just go ahead and click the update content type right here. And now let me jump over into one of our existing custom post types and show you what happens. So if you already have existing posts like what we have in this example, you're going to have to go ahead and make one edit to the page and then it will automatically populate. Let me show you what that means. So what you can do is just go ahead in here and just hit the save button. And now if you see what happens, there's a new link down here where it says single post. So now you can go ahead and click here and it will pull you into the post that it was just created. But let me go ahead and just shut that down and show you where else that's going to be displayed is if you go underneath your post right here. This one right here, a world outside of WordPress, that's the one we just created. So now we have a unique URL that was automatically created when you create your CCT. And when you go into it, all that's going to be displayed is the title. That's what the configuration we have in there. And then it's just going to pull in whatever description you have as like the content. So it's not going to pull in anything like categories. There's no featured image or anything like that. It's just going to be mapped for the title and the homepage or the description right here. So from there, you can do anything you want. So if you want to go into edit with Elementor and then make it where it's a unique page and you have your Spotify links and all of that, it's a very similar process. So I'm not going to cover that, but I just wanted to show you that when you have that as single page, it's going to automatically create those pages. So now I'm going to show you how you can link a button into that post. So let's go ahead back into our listing template. So now I'm going to remove these two buttons that I created earlier, and let's just go ahead and add a dynamic button in there. So on the left side underneath your listing elements, you could just pull in a dynamic link. You could also kind of consider like a dynamic button. So you don't want to have permalink because it's not going to work correctly. What we need to do is scroll down here underneath your content type right here, and you're going to see this new thing called single post ID. So that's going to pull in the unique ID that created to tag to your post. It will all make sense in just a second. So now from here, you could style this up like a regular button. You can have a background color. You know, you can, let me go and actually select our blue color. You can change the text to white, give it some padding, let's say like 10. So now it looks like a regular button. And let's just go ahead and hit update and let me show you what happens now. And so if I go ahead into that page we created and hit refresh, you're going to see those links are going to go away. And now we're going to have the button right here where it says read more. The only one that's going to work correctly is actually the very first one. So you can see right here, if I click that, that's going to go into that post we just created. So it's not styled up or anything like that. Like I said, that's when you can go into Elementor and make this like a unique page if you want. But if I go back into here, you're going to notice that this doesn't go anywhere. It just kind of links back to this page. And that's because we need to actually go and hit save on those pages, just like I did for the first one. We need to do the same thing, because if you look underneath post, there's only that one. So all we need to do is just go back into our podcast. Number 2 needed to be saved. So you just need to go here, hit save again. And now you want to always make sure that, I like this because it's a visual way. So you have to make sure that it always is enabled down here or the links aren't going to work. So of course, if you had that enabled already that has single page, you wouldn't have to go ahead and do this. So as soon as you save it the very first time, it will automatically create those posts for you automatically. So now if I go underneath post, you're going to see we have the other 2 right here. So now if I hit refresh on here, you're going to notice that they now go to the unique page that it just created. So our first podcast, you can see the URL is our first podcast. And then that's, of course, like I said, you could style it up, make it look a lot better, of course. So here's a cool little tip. If you wanted to have it where the user can click on the whole card and not just the read more, I can show you how easy that is. If you just go back into your listing template, let's go ahead and actually remove the button, and let's just make it where this whole thing is clickable. And all you have to do is underneath where it says settings, underneath your listing item settings, go underneath listing settings. And then there's a button right here that says make listing item clickable. So once you click that, all you need to do is scroll down just like we did before, and underneath content type, click where it says single post ID. And that's it. You just need to go ahead and click update. And now when you go back to that page and hit refresh, of course, the button's going to go away, and now the whole thing is clickable. So now if I click on that, it's going to go into the page. So you can see right here. So depending on your use case, you can always just tie it to just like an image, or in this case, we could do the whole card. Now we're going to move on to the part where you can go ahead and click a button, and a pop-up is going to come up with that unique information for each listing. I personally think that's a much better approach than having the has single page, because you have to now do double the work almost. You have to like restyle that page up, and it could be a lot of extra work. But the first thing is you're going to want to make sure you have JetPopup installed. And then once you have that installed, you're just going to go ahead and click add new pop-up. And in this case, I'm going to be using Elementor, and just give it a name right here. And then you just go ahead and click create. And now let me jump into the one I created and show you how I have everything set up. So once you get in here, it should look pretty similar to this, but now let's go ahead and start to build this thing out. So the first thing is you're going to want to click the add new container right here. And I'm just going to have it where I just want to have like the title, some static information, so I can show you how static information will display. And then let's add those two links back, the Spotify and the Apple Podcast link. So the very first one is, let's go ahead and just go underneath here and pull in a regular heading. So I can show you, you can just use an Elementor heading if you want. And underneath where it says dynamic tags, you're going to want to click this one right here for title. Scroll down into custom content type field. And then we're going to do the podcast title. So that's just going to be the title of the podcast. I'm going to style that up and center it. So the one thing is, when you are using JetPopup, it's not going to show dynamic information on the back end. So you're going to have to either copy it from what you have before in your listing. You can just paste it in here, or you're just going to have to kind of hit update, test it, and kind of go back and forth a little bit. But let's just go ahead and keep this simple. We're going to do an H2, and we're going to center it. Now let's go ahead and just pull in a regular static like text editor and just type in something like check out our latest podcast on the following networks. I don't know, something like that. Because underneath that, I'm going to have the two images, like I said. So that's just static information. Now let's go ahead and just like we did before, I like to click on the last one, go underneath layout, click container. So since these are going to be static images with dynamic links, you can go underneath basic. This is a regular Elementor image widget. Just pull that in. We're going to choose the Spotify one like we did before. Underneath link, we do custom URL, dynamic tags. Scroll down into the very last one, the custom content type field. And then we're going to do the Spotify link. So click on that. And then underneath the advanced, we're going to need to make this 50%. So custom, let's do 50%. And then I like to duplicate it. It's a little bit easier. So let's go ahead and add the Apple one. Since you already duplicated it, you can go ahead and underneath the field for the dynamic link, we're going to choose Apple Podcast. And then the container that it's sitting in, like I said, we need to go underneath layout, direction. Let's do horizontal. So they sit next to each other like that. And so now we just go ahead and hit update. Definitely keep this tab open because I'm going to show you a few other things you might need to enable. So now let's go ahead and add a button to the listing template. And then when a user clicks that, it will do the pop-up instead. So in this situation, what we can do is just pull in a regular Elementor button widget. So underneath basic, you can just pull in the regular Elementor one, because the way you target these JetPopups is through the advanced option right here. Let's go ahead and let's do open pop-up. Just something that looks a little bit different. Let's style up that button so you can actually see it. So background color, let's do our blue, change the text color to white. Very simple, nothing crazy. So like I said, you need to go underneath advanced for that button, and you're going to see this new tab right here called JetPopup. Now what we need to do is the pop-up we just created, I called it podcast pop-up. So just type in something like podcast pop-up template. And then what that's going to do is you have the trigger event of click on widget. So probably just enable that one. You can do click on button. You can even do hover states, but let's just go ahead and do that and hit update. So now if we go back into the page and try to click on open pop-up, you're going to notice that it's probably not going to work correctly. So we're not being able to pull in the header and these links don't go anywhere. So there's a couple different settings that you're going to need to change in order for this dynamic information to show up correctly. So go back into your pop-up right here. You're going to want to make sure that you have this button enabled right here where it says JetEngine listing pop-up. So go ahead and click yes on that and then jump over into your pop-up template. So where you created the pop-up itself. This is really important. You're going to want to make sure you click loading content with Ajax. So that's underneath the settings right here. And then click on settings again. You need to make sure that that is on and then click force loading on right here. So once you do that, hit update. And then one other thing I recommend is disable has single page. If you're not going to be using that with pop-ups, you probably have to turn that off. I don't think it's going to work correctly if you have that enabled. So now let's go ahead, hit refresh again. And now when you click on each pop-up, you're going to see that it's pulling in the title correctly. And then if I click on this, it should go to episode 3. So you can see right here, episode 3 in Spotify. And if I click on open pop-up right here on the second one, the title is correct right here. So you definitely, if it's not loading that information correctly, this is going to be the option that you want to make sure you have it enabled on, and that is the Ajax. And one last tip for this tutorial is if you want to make it where the whole card is clickable, it will open the pop-up. You could do the same option we did before in just one other setting. So if you go underneath your listing template that we created, I removed that button that said open pop-up. Now what you could do is click on settings for the listing items, go underneath your listing settings, and where it said make listing item clickable, just go ahead and click that. Underneath your link source, you're going to want to go ahead and click right here where it says open JetPopup. And underneath JetPopup, you're going to want to make sure that you choose the one that we created. So from there, you can hit update. And then there's one other option you need to click to make sure that this all works correctly. And that is if you go back into your JetPopup right here, underneath your display conditions, what you need to do is make sure that it's enabled for the whole site. Or if you want to just target this one specific page, you could do that. But go underneath here where it said display conditions, and that is underneath your JetPopup settings. So if you click on the settings here, under your settings, this new thing is going to pop up, or you could always just go ahead and click right here where it says JetPopups, and this is going to display it right there. So where it says conditions aren't selected, you could just hit that, hit add new condition, and right here where it says include entire site, you could just do that. Or if you wanted, you could always just go ahead and just target that specific page. But let's just do entire site to keep it simple. So now after that's done, if you hit refresh, now when you click on each one of these cards, it's going to automatically pop up right here with all of that dynamic information. And you can see it's all pulling in correctly. So if I click on future page builders, that's coming up right here. First podcast. So now the pop-ups are fully integrated where the user can click on the whole card. And that's it for this JetEngine tutorial on how to set up custom content types and use JetPopup to target that dynamic information. Thank you for watching.